Palpatine's return, in Star Wars, The Rise of Skywalker, is one of the most divisive moments in modern cinematic history. It's not just a question of whether his resurrection was a good idea, it's a question of how it was executed, and whether it even made sense within the grander narrative of Star Wars. The Emperor, once the terrifying puppet master behind the galaxy's greatest conflicts, suddenly popped back into the picture with all the subtlety of a Death Star explosion. Fans worldwide were left scratching their heads. Was this brilliant storytelling, or a desperate attempt to revive a failing storyline? For decades, Palpatine's death at the hands of Darth Vader was the ultimate conclusion to the Skywalker saga. It was poetic, powerful, and deeply satisfying. So why undo it? Bringing him back undermines not only the ending of Return of the Jedi, but also the entire arc of Anakin Skywalker. His redemption, the prophecy of the Chosen One, and the balance of the Force, it all gets thrown into question. And don't even get me started on how it affects Luke and Rey. This decision shook the foundations of Star Wars lore, and not in a good way. But let's be honest, the biggest problem isn't just that they brought Palpatine back, it's how they did it. The sheer laziness of the explanation, or lack thereof, leaves fans with more questions than answers. The line "somehow, Palpatine returned" has become infamous, almost a meme unto itself. Did anyone stop to think about the implications of resurrecting one of the most iconic villains in cinematic history, without even bothering to explain how? If you're going to rewrite the rules of life and death, at least try to make it believable. The impact of this decision ripples through the entire sequel trilogy. It turns Snoke into a meaningless pawn, reduces Kylo Ren's arc to a tangled mess, and shifts the spotlight away from the new characters we were supposed to care about. Instead of letting Rey face a fresh, original antagonist, they shoved her into the shadow of a villain who had already been defeated decades earlier. It's like the filmmakers couldn't commit to their own ideas, so they fell back on nostalgia, hoping we wouldn't notice. Spoiler alert, we did. So in this video, we're going to break down exactly why Palpatine's return doesn't work. We'll explore how it undermines the saga, weakens the sequel trilogy, and alienates fans who wanted more from their beloved galaxy far, far away. Whether you're a lifelong Star Wars fan, or just someone who appreciates good storytelling, stick around, this is going to be one heck of a deep dive. If you're going to bring back the biggest villain in Star Wars history, you need a better explanation than "somehow Palpatine has returned." This single line, delivered by Poe Dameron, has become a lightning rod for criticism, encapsulating everything wrong with Palpatine's resurrection. It's lazy, dismissive, and assumes the audience will accept the return of such an iconic villain without question, for a franchise built on detailed world-building and lore. This throwaway line feels like a slap in the face to fans who have spent decades immersed in the galaxy far, far away. The problem isn't just the lack of detail, it's the sheer carelessness of it all. This is Palpatine we're talking about, the architect of the Clone Wars and the mastermind behind the fall of the Jedi Order. His return should have been an earth-shattering revelation, accompanied by a clear explanation that added depth to the saga. Instead, we're left with vague hints about dark science and cloning, which feel more like placeholders than actual answers. How did he survive the reactor shaft? How did his body end up on Exegol? And if he was behind everything all along, why wait so long to reveal himself? The lack of explanation doesn't just weaken the narrative, it undermines the stakes of the entire story. Then what does that say about the sacrifices made by the heroes of the original trilogy? It reduces the weight of the conflict, making the galaxy's struggles feel hollow. What's the point of fighting against evil if it can just somehow return without warning or consequence? Ultimately, this line set the tone for the problems that plagued The Rise of Skywalker. It signaled a lack of planning and respect for the story being told. Palpatine's return wasn't a meticulously crafted twist, it was a hasty attempt to tie loose ends together. And when your starting point is "somehow," it's no wonder the rest of the story falls apart. The line became a meme for a reason. It's the epitome of lazy storytelling in a franchise that once prided itself on attention to detail. One of the most powerful and iconic moments in Star Wars is Darth Vader's redemption at the end of Return of the Jedi. After decades of serving the dark side, Anakin Skywalker sacrifices himself to save his son and destroy Emperor Palpatine. This act not only redeems Anakin, but also fulfills the prophecy of the Chosen One, bringing balance to the Force. It's a deeply emotional and satisfying conclusion that ties up the central conflict of the saga. Palpatine's return, in The Rise of Skywalker, completely undermines this. If Palpatine didn't truly die, then what was the point of Vader's sacrifice? Anakin's redemption loses its weight, and the prophecy of the Chosen One is rendered meaningless. The entire climax of the original trilogy, the moment that defined the saga for generations, is retroactively cheapened. It's as if the filmmakers didn't understand or respect the significance of what came before. This isn't just a minor narrative issue, it's a fundamental betrayal of the story's core themes. Anakin's journey from hero to villain and back to hero again is the heart of Star Wars. His ultimate act of selflessness, driven by love for his son, is what makes the story resonate on such a deep level. By bringing back Palpatine, the writers not only diminish Anakin's arc, but also the message of hope and redemption that defines the saga. Even worse, it creates confusion about the prophecy itself. If Anakin was supposed to bring balance to the Force, how does Palpatine's survival fit into that? Did the prophecy fail? Or does it mean nothing at all? These are questions that The Rise of Skywalker doesn't bother to address, leaving fans to grapple with the implications. By undoing Vader's sacrifice, the sequel trilogy also undoes one of the most profound and meaningful moments in cinematic history. Remember Snoke, the towering, enigmatic figure introduced in The Force Awakens as the supreme leader of the First Order. Fans spent years speculating about his origins and motivations. Was he a new Sith Lord? A resurrected dark-side user from ancient times? His presence hinted at a larger mystery that would define the sequel trilogy. But then, The Last Jedi killed him off with no answers, and The Rise of Skywalker turned him into a complete joke. We eventually learned that Snoke was nothing more than a puppet created by Palpatine. In fact, we literally see clones of Snoke floating in vats on Exegol. This reveal not only reduces Snoke to a mere plot device, but also retroactively weakens his role in the first two films. He's no longer a menacing, independent villain, just another tool in Palpatine's grand plan. And if Snoke was controlled by Palpatine all along, why didn't the Emperor reveal himself sooner? What was the point of all the theatrics? This revelation also diminishes Palpatine's character. Instead of being the cunning, manipulative mastermind we've come to know, he's reduced to a shadowy figure sitting on a throne, pulling strings from afar. It's not a clever or satisfying twist, it's a cheap cop-out that leaves fans feeling cheated. Snoke could have been an intriguing new antagonist, but instead, he was discarded without care, his potential wasted. The ripple effect of this decision is felt throughout the sequel trilogy. By turning Snoke into a clone, the writers not only ruin his character, but also muddy the story's logic. How did Palpatine create such a powerful and independent clone? Why did Snoke act with emotions and agency if he was just a puppet? These questions are never answered, leaving fans with an incomplete and unsatisfying narrative. Rey's journey was supposed to be about self-discovery and forging her own destiny. She started as a scavenger on Jakku, a nobody with no family and no claim to greatness. Her story resonated with fans because it showed that heroism isn't tied to lineage, it's about the choices you make. But The Rise of Skywalker turned all of that on its head by revealing that Rey is a Palpatine. This twist feels like a betrayal of her character arc. Instead of being a self-made hero, Rey's power and importance are now tied to her bloodline. It's no longer about what she can achieve on her own, it's about who she's related to. This not only undermines the message of the sequel trilogy, but also contradicts the themes of the original films. In Star Wars, legacy doesn't define you, your actions do. Rey being a Palpatine flies in the face of this idea. The twist also feels forced and unnecessary. There was no setup for it in the previous films, making it feel like a last-minute addition rather than a natural progression of the story. It's as if the writers couldn't figure out how to make Rey compelling on her own, so they tied her to a legacy character instead. But this decision does more harm than good, reducing her agency and making her accomplishments feel less earned. This revelation also muddies the central conflict of the sequel trilogy. If Rey's journey is about rejecting her dark heritage, then what was the point of her struggles in the previous films? She had already proven herself as a hero, regardless of her origins. By making her a Palpatine, the story takes a step backward, forcing her to grapple with questions she had already answered. It's a frustrating and unnecessary twist that cheapens her character and her journey. Nostalgia can be a powerful tool in storytelling, but it can also be a crutch. Palpatine's return is a clear example of the latter. Instead of creating a new and compelling antagonist for the sequel trilogy, the writers fell back on a character they knew fans already recognized. It's a safe choice, but not a satisfying one. By relying so heavily on Palpatine, the sequel trilogy fails to stand on its own. It feels like it's constantly looking backward instead of forward. The original trilogy introduced Darth Vader and the Emperor, while the prequels gave us characters like Darth Maul and Count Dooku. Each trilogy expanded the galaxy and added new layers to the story. The sequels, however, couldn't seem to let go of the past. This over-reliance on nostalgia doesn't just hurt the story, it hurts the new characters. Rey, Finn, and Poe deserved to face unique challenges and villains that were tailored to their arcs. Instead, they were forced to confront the recycled threats of the original trilogy. This decision robbed the sequels of their identity, making them feel more like a tribute act than a continuation of the saga. At its core, Star Wars has always been about exploration and discovery. It's about pushing boundaries and creating new stories in a galaxy far, far away. By bringing back Palpatine, the sequel trilogy failed to honor this legacy. It leaned so heavily on nostalgia that it forgot to create something new, leaving fans with a story that feels hollow and uninspired. Palpatine's return wasn't just a misstep, it was a symptom of a larger problem with the sequels. Palpatine's return was supposed to be a monumental moment, a shocking twist that left audiences reeling. Instead, it felt like a rushed afterthought, a band-aid slapped onto a story that was struggling to find its footing. The Emperor deserved better, and so did the fans. Bringing him back wasn't just a mistake, it was a fundamental misunderstanding of what made Star Wars resonate with audiences for generations. This wasn't the grand culmination of a 9-part saga, it was a desperate Hail Mary, and it landed flat. When we think about Palpatine, we think about one of the greatest villains ever put to screen. His manipulations shaped the galaxy, his presence was terrifying, and his defeat was a triumphant moment for the forces of good. Reducing him to a plot device cheapened all of that. It's not just that his return didn't make sense, it's that it actively worked against the themes of hope, redemption, and balance that are core to Star Wars. How can you celebrate victory when the ultimate villain can just pop back up like a bad penny? The sequel trilogy had an opportunity to stand on its own, to introduce us to new characters and explore fresh stories. Instead, it leaned too heavily on the past, and Palpatine's return is the clearest example of that. By dragging the saga backward, it failed to move forward. Rey deserved a unique antagonist who challenged her in ways we hadn't seen before. Kylo Ren deserved the chance to step fully into his own role as either hero or villain. And we, the fans, deserved a story that respected the legacy of what came before. At its best, Star Wars is about storytelling that inspires us. It's about heroes who overcome impossible odds, villains who leave us chilled, and a galaxy that feels alive with possibilities. Palpatine's return stripped away some of that magic. It made the galaxy feel smaller, the stakes feel lower, and the story feel less important. For a saga that's meant to be timeless, this decision made it feel dated, even cynical. In the end, Palpatine's return isn't just a narrative misstep. It's a symptom of a larger problem with the sequel trilogy. It's what happens when storytelling takes a backseat to spectacle, when nostalgia replaces innovation, and when characters are sacrificed for the sake of fan service. But hey, maybe we can learn something from this. If nothing else, it's a reminder that even in a galaxy far, far away, some things are better left buried.